They mistook my silence for surrender. When I didn't argue back, they leaned closer. When I didn't raise my voice, they raised theirs. When I chose not to explain myself, they filled the space with their assumptions. In their minds, quiet meant fragile. Stillness meant fear, and patience meant permission. I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned that some people only listen to respond, not to understand. At first, I tried to be heard. I chose careful words. I softened my tone. I waited for the right moment. But every sentence I offered was twisted, every pause interrupted, every feeling dismissed. I realized that my voice wasn't the problem. Their hunger for control was, so I stopped explaining. That's when they decided who I was. Weak, easy, convenient, someone they could step over without consequence. They mistook my restraint for emptiness, my calm for defeat. They smiled when I walked away from arguments. They rolled their eyes when I chose peace. They whispered that I couldn't stand up for myself. What they didn't see was the work happening inside me. Silence became my shield. While they spoke loudly, I listened closely. I watched patterns repeat. I noticed how their kindness depended on my compliance, how respect vanished the moment I set a boundary. I learned who only valued me when I made myself small. Staying quiet gave me clarity. I stopped reacting, and in that stillness, I began to think. I asked myself hard questions. Why did I feel the need to prove my worth to people who benefited from my doubt? Why did I keep offering explanations to those who had already decided not to believe me? Why did I confuse being understood with being accepted? Quiet helped me hear my own answers. They grew bolder as I grew calmer. They tested limits, pushed lines, waited for me to break. They expected tears, anger, or an apology I didn't owe. Instead, they got silence. Not the kind that pleads, but the kind that observes, and that made them uncomfortable. Because silence that comes from weakness is shaky. It begs for approval. It waits for rescue. But silence that comes from strength is steady. It doesn't rush. It doesn't chase validation. It lets truth reveal itself. I didn't announce my boundaries. I lived them. I stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. I stopped giving access to people who weaponized my honesty. I stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable. I didn't explain the changes. I let them notice. That's when they realized something had shifted. They tried to provoke me, to pull me back into old patterns. They accused me of being cold, distant, different. They said I'd changed, as if growth were a flaw. But I hadn't changed. I had remembered who I was before I learned to doubt myself. Silence taught me discipline. It taught me when to speak and when to walk away. It taught me that not every battle deserves my voice, and not every misunderstanding needs correction. Some truths are proven by consistency, not volume. They thought I was weak because I didn't fight. What they didn't understand was that I was choosing where my strength belonged. Strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like leaving without saying a word because you finally trust yourself enough to do so. I stayed quiet, not to disappear, but to rebuild, and when I finally spoke again, it wasn't to defend myself. It was to define myself. My words were fewer, but they were firm. My presence was calmer, but it carried weight. I no longer needed their approval to stand tall. Silence didn't make me weak. It made me unshakable. They noticed the silence changing before they admitted it. At first, my quiet had comforted them. It gave them space to assume control, to narrate the story however they liked. They spoke for me about me over me, and I let them, not because I agreed, but because I was watching, measuring, learning. But silence, when paired with awareness, becomes dangerous to those who rely on noise. They began to feel it when I stopped reacting the way I used to. The old version of me explained, apologized, tried to fix things even when I wasn't the one who broke them. That version gave them reassurance. The new quiet gave them none. They asked questions I didn't rush to answer. They made comments I didn't correct. They tested me with sarcasm, guilt, and subtle insults. I stayed still. And stillness made them uneasy. Because when someone stops reacting, you can no longer control the outcome. You don't know what they're planning. You don't know what they've decided. Silence removes leverage. They tried to label it first. You've become distant. You think you're better than everyone now. You don't care anymore. They needed a reason, any reason, to explain why their influence was fading. What they didn't understand was that my silence wasn't emptiness. It was preparation. In that quiet space, I rebuilt myself, respect piece by piece. I learned to separate guilt from responsibility. I learned that being calm doesn't mean being passive. And most importantly, I learned that not everyone deserves access to my thoughts, my plans, or my pain. Silence became my filter. I stopped oversharing. I stopped seeking validation. I stopped handing people the tools they used against me. They felt the shift when their words stopped landing, when their opinions no longer shaped my mood, when their approval stopped being currency in my life. They could feel they were losing something, even if they couldn't name it. That's when the pressure increased. They tried louder tactics, public criticism, emotional reminders, bringing up the past. They wanted a reaction, anger, tears, defense, anything that proved they still mattered enough to shake me. I gave them none. Because strength had taught me something silence never forgets. You don't owe explanations to people committed to misunderstanding you. My quiet wasn't avoidance. It was boundaries without debate. I wasn't shutting down. I was shutting out what no longer deserved my energy. And that's when they realized the truth they feared most. I was no longer weak. I was no longer available. And I was no longer predictable. Silence had changed me, not into someone cold, but into someone clear. Clear about what I tolerate. Clear about where I belong. Clear about the fact that my worth doesn't rise or fall with anyone's opinion. They thought silence was my breaking point. It was my training ground. Because when you learn to stand firm without shouting, to walk away without drama, and to trust yourself without witnesses, you become untouchable in ways noise can never achieve. I didn't stay quiet because I was afraid to speak. I stayed quiet because I finally knew who I was. There came a day when I understood something they never expected me to realize. My silence was no longer a reaction to them. It had become a decision for myself. Before, staying quiet took effort. It felt heavy, like holding your breath underwater. But over time, it became natural. Peace replaced tension. Clarity replaced confusion. I no longer replayed conversations in my head, wondering what I should have said differently. I no longer imagined winning arguments that were never fair to begin with. Silence stopped being restraint. It became confidence. They could sense it. Not because I said anything, but because I didn't need to. When people are used to controlling you through emotion, your calm feels like rebellion. When they expect explanations, your certainty feels like defiance. When they rely on your reactions, your indifference feels like loss. They started watching me more closely, noticing how I smiled without seeking approval, how I listened without absorbing disrespect, how I chose distance without hostility. I didn't argue. I didn't announce my growth. I didn't demand recognition. I simply moved differently, and that unsettled them more than any confrontation ever could. Because silence backed by self-trust is undeniable. They tried one last time to pull me back. Old stories, old labels, old versions of me they preferred because those versions were easier to manage. They spoke as if nothing had changed, hoping familiarity would weaken my resolve. It didn't. For the first time, I saw the situation clearly, not emotionally, but truthfully. I saw how often my kindness had been mistaken for obligation, how my patience had been exploited, how my silence had once kept me stuck. But this silence was different. This silence came from choice. I had learned that strength doesn't rush to prove itself. It doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't beg to be understood. It knows that people who benefit from your self-doubt will always fear your self-respect. So I let them think whatever they wanted. Let them call it cold. Let them call it pride. Let them misunderstand. Because I finally understood something that changed everything. Not everyone needs closure. Not everyone deserves clarity. Some people only need boundaries, and boundaries don't require speeches. The moment I stopped trying to be seen by them, I started seeing myself. I trusted my instincts. I honored my limits. I protected my energy like something valuable because it was. And in doing so, I became someone they could no longer manipulate. They lost access. Not because I shut them out angrily, but because I stopped opening the door. That's when silence revealed its final lesson. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is strength that has learned control. It is knowing when words will waste you. It is choosing peace over performance. It is understanding that the loudest proof of growth is consistency, not explanation. I didn't need to raise my voice to reclaim my power. I didn't need to fight to prove my worth. I didn't need to be understood to move forward. I stayed quiet, and in that quiet, I became free. Not invisible, not weak, not small, just unshakable. And that was something they could never take from me. Eventually, something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking about them. Not out of bitterness. Not because I was pretending not to care, but because silence had done its final work. It had untangled me from the need for their reaction. Their opinions no longer followed me into quiet moments. Their judgments no longer echoed in my decisions. That's when I knew I was free. Freedom didn't arrive loudly. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final message, no last explanation. It arrived quietly, the way clarity always does. One ordinary day, I realized I was choosing myself without hesitation and without guilt. Silence had taught me independence. I learned that peace is not something you negotiate for. It's something you claim. I learned that you don't have to convince people to treat you well. You simply remove yourself from places where respect is optional. They had once believed my quiet meant they could keep crossing lines. Now my quiet meant there were lines they would never reach again. I moved forward without announcing it. I made decisions without seeking permission. I built distance without hostility. I protected my time without apology. And the most powerful part, I didn't need them to notice. When people lose access to you, they often try to regain it through guilt, through nostalgia, through reminders of who you used to be for them. They speak as if the past is a debt you owe. But silence had taught me this truth. You are not required to remain who someone needed you to be in order to survive. Growth makes some people uncomfortable because it removes their advantage. Your peace exposes their chaos. Your calm reflects what they never learned to control. So I let them sit with their discomfort. I no longer explained why I changed. I no longer defended my choices. I no longer felt responsible for how my boundaries made others feel. That responsibility had never been mine. It just took silence to reveal it. Strength doesn't chase closure. It accepts that some chapters end without conversation. Some lessons are learned without apology. Some goodbyes happen without words. Silence gave me room to breathe, to heal, to rebuild my identity without outside interference. In that space, I found a version of myself that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I spoke when it mattered, I listened when it was wise, and I walked away when it was necessary. That balance changed everything. They once thought my silence meant I had nothing left. In reality, it meant I had finally chosen myself. Silence didn't isolate me, it liberated me. And once you experience that kind of freedom, you never confuse quiet with weakness again, because silence, when chosen, is not absence, it is arrival. In the end, I understood something that changed how I saw everything. Silence was never my loss. It was my awakening. For so long I believed strength had to be proven, through arguments, explanations, endurance. I thought being heard meant being loud, and being strong meant being visible. But silence taught me a deeper truth. The strongest shifts often happen where no one is watching. I didn't win by overpowering anyone. I didn't heal by being validated. I didn't grow by being understood. I grew by choosing myself, quietly. Silence stripped away the noise that kept me confused. It removed the pressure to perform, to please, to justify my existence. In that stillness, I learned the difference between connection and attachment, between loyalty and self-betrayal. I learned that some relationships survive only as long as you abandon yourself for them. Letting go didn't require an announcement. Walking away didn't require approval. Becoming stronger didn't require permission. The world expects pain to be dramatic. It expects healing to be loud. It expects empowerment to look like confrontation. But my transformation happened without spectacle. It happened in small decisions, what I tolerated, where I stayed, and when I chose peace over explanation. Silence taught me restraint, and restraint taught me power. I no longer felt the urge to prove my worth to people who couldn't see it. I no longer needed closure from those who benefited from my confusion. I no longer chased understanding from those committed to misunderstanding me. Their opinions lost weight when I stopped carrying them. That was the real freedom. Silence gave me space to rebuild my identity without interference, to define my values without compromise, to protect my energy as something sacred, not endlessly available. I learned to speak with intention and to stay quiet with confidence. And when I did speak again, my words were calm, measured, and final, because silence had sharpened them. I became someone who no longer reacts, only responds. Someone who doesn't argue for respect, but lives in a way that demands it. Someone who understands that walking away can be more powerful than standing your ground in a place that no longer serves you. They once thought my quiet meant I was weak. Now I know better. Silence wasn't me giving up, it was me growing up. It was me choosing clarity over chaos, peace over pride, and self-respect over approval. I didn't lose my voice. I learned when it mattered. And that is the kind of strength that doesn't fade, doesn't beg, and doesn't break, because it was built in silence, sustained by self-trust, and carried forward with purpose. Silence wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I finally took control of it.